Today's devotion is titled Be a Resolver, and we are on day 215, and we are on August the 3rd, if you're following along on the calendar date. And as far as the morning rinse, if you're reading the Bible through alphabetically, today's morning rinse is Leviticus 10 through 13. And so after you read that, come on back or listen to it on the audio app, or however you like to read your Bible. And we're going to talk about the featured verses. There are two. Leviticus 10, 19 through 20. But Aaron spoke to Moses, "Behold, this very day they presented their sin offering and their burnt offering before the Lord. When things like these happened to me, if I had eaten a sin offering today, would it have been good in the sight of the Lord?" When Moses heard that, it seemed good in his sight. So Nadab and Abihu were Aaron's two oldest sons, and they were priests underneath of his leadership. And in today's morning rinse, it is suggested that they brought coals of fire from an outside source to keep the altar fire burning for their sacrifice. And that's in chapter 10, verse 1. And if they had done this, since it was suggested that they did this act would have made the sacrifice that they gave unholy, since the fire on this altar was never supposed to go out, as we learned yesterday. These two men became lazy and indifferent to the holiness of God by not keeping this fire holy. And so therefore, their consequence was death. Their two younger brothers, Eleazar and Ithamar, were next in line for the positions of priesthood. And I can only imagine how they must have felt in this moment, with emotions really high. I'm sure that, one, they were angry at their brothers for becoming indifferent, and they were also probably a bit fearful of making a mistake themselves that would be worthy of death. And understandably so, they probably did not want to finish their brother's job of this sacrifice by eating from it, which was part of the sacrificial ritual. So with confusion and chaos surrounding this whole situation, Moses got angry at Eleazar and Ithamar for not eating from the sacrifice that their older brothers had started. Well, Aaron came to defend Eleazar and Ithamar with basically a reasonable explanation, calming Moses down and ultimately diffusing the entire climatic situation. And Aaron, through his conversation with Moses, brought order back to this atmosphere. Do I think that Moses got a little too angry at times and jumped to conclusion? I honestly think so, probably so. If you look, and I've mentioned this before when we've talked about Moses in the past. He killed an Egyptian. He hit a rock too many times, causing his fate to not be able to go into the promised land. And then he gets angry in this situation as well. These are just some of the documented moments in time where Moses got angry. And I personally believe that Moses had an anger issue. He spouted out and got angry, probably too quick. And, ultimately it caused his fate, his consequence of not being able to go into the promised land. That's my personal conviction or belief. You may have another one. You might not think he had an issue with anger at all. I kind of tend to lean that he did. And I believe that Aaron knew this and had to learn the skill of being a resolver of conflict when emotions were really high. So we too, as people, will always be around others that may get angry occasionally. Being away from situations where there could be anger surfacing is probably not realistic. We have people in our lives that respond with a bit of an elevation, if you will. And maybe we are that person. I don't know. Maybe we're the person that tends to actually respond with a little more anger than what we should. And learning how to control that would be absolutely key. But we also understand that there could be loved ones around us that respond in anger, or have that kind of response. And the reality of it is, I've said this before, the Bible is full of real people who make mistakes, real people who respond, in ungodly fashion, real people who have issues. That's, we can relate to these scenarios so often. And when we read the Bible, anyways, when I read the Bible, I can relate to so many of the things that are happening. And this is, another day where if we have somebody in our lives that tends to lean into becoming passionately elevated, I should say, or with anger, how do we respond to them? Do we bounce back with anger, or do we learn, like Aaron learned, how to be a resolver? And so the question would be, can we be an Aaron during those moments of conflict when we are surrounded by someone who has a passionate elevation tendency, or shall we just say it, anger towards that? And Aaron, probably didn't snap his finger and just all of a sudden be a resolver to, every single moment of heightened emotion that Moses displayed. He probably learned through time, and God helped him with that. So the question is, can we be an Aaron in situations where others might be elevated in their emotion? Can we be a resolver, and can we learn how to respond with situations like situations that we read about in Moses's time, that will teach us that we can de-escalate a situation if someone is angry? And so how do we do that? It's going to be a different scenario for every single time. And is it going to be successful every single time? Probably not. But the more that we learn from examples in the Bible, and the more that we learn to speak with better tonality and better, conversation points, and not bounce back and not feed off of the anger energy, we will then become a resolver like Aaron. And the featured verses that were, that I read today were the tail inside of the conversation when Moses was angry. So going into the featured verses, Moses was angry and frustrated at these two young priests because they didn't want to finish the sacrifice ritual that needed to be finished from a priesthood standpoint. Let me read the featured verses one more time so that you can get kind of a little bit more glimpse of it. So Moses is really mad, and then Aaron comes along and says, "Behold, this very day they presented their sin offering and their burnt offering before the Lord. When things like these happened to me, if I had eaten a sin offering today, would it have been good in the sight of the Lord?" And when Moses heard that, it seemed good in his sight. How that Aaron responded is key, and how he diffused the situation and got Moses to calm down is key. And so the challenge to dig deeper is, look around you. Is there someone in your life who often responds in anger? And, maybe you're that person. Maybe you are. But is there someone else in your life that will respond in anger. I mean, we know that if this happens, this can cause more conflict than the actual conflict itself. I mean, you've got this conflict and you're trying to work through the conflict, and someone comes along and is super, super mad at the conflict. And then you've got other people who are feeding off of their responses, causing even more conflict than the conflict itself. I get it. So today's challenge is I want you to look online. Go to Google or ChatGPT or whatever ways that you look for articles, and look for an article with tips on how to resolve conflict. There are tons of articles out there that will provide tips and strategies on how to resolve conflict. And that's really what it is it's a resolution, conflict resolution skill is really what they, and they teach, there's classes out there, there's courses, there's events that have workshops, there's all kinds of YouTube videos from counselors. There's all kinds of things. And so I want you to go online, maybe YouTube will have something that you like, but look for an article or a video that helps to resolve, or helps to teach you how to resolve conflict. And I want you to learn 2 skills today to be a resolver, and see how you can relate this to Aaron's story and how Moses reacted. But watch a video, or maybe it is, I've seen a lot of videos where the counselor will share a scenario and they'll give the scenario of what this person may say, or what a popular thing that somebody with anger management will say. What are those things that they will say? Or you might be able to, just if you are around somebody who constantly says the same thing and it just is around that scenario when they're angry, go to ChatGPT and say, I am needing a really great response to somebody who continually says this thing to me. You never know what you can learn, but the point of today's devotion is to realize that we can learn, just like Aaron did, to be a resolver. And so being prepared to use what we learned, and having that right in our forefront of our brain in case an opportunity comes your way today or in the near future. And then commit to being a resolver. Commit to becoming and being a resolver. And the reality of it is, we could learn as well. I mean, like if we have a struggle with anger, maybe these articles or YouTube videos will help us to speak different lingos, say different things, respond different ways. And so whether you are a person that responds in anger very defaultly, if that's a word, or if you are dealing with someone who responds with anger, we can always do better with learning new skills. And the reality too is Moses was a leader. He was leading tens of thousands and thousands and thousands of people. God chose him, even in his anger issue state, up to the very end. God still used him. I don't know if he was ever healed of getting super frustrated and having, a response mechanism like what he had. I don't know if God calmed him down or if he chose to. Probably through time. I mean, it would certainly be humbling if you're living a life and making mistakes and killing a man and getting angry. And, I can imagine in my mind's eye, Moses had sort of there's some people who, if they have somebody who bugs them, they do what I call a shrugging them off the shoulder and just being okay with them not in their lives, like, excommunicating them from their life. And I kind of have an inkling that Moses was like that in a way. I don't know if it's true or not, but when he would go to Pharaoh and he would present what what was happening in Pharaoh or in the land, and he would say, "Okay, here's this plague." And then Pharaoh would say, "Okay, well, I will release it." And then, Moses would, pray and have God remove all of the locusts or whatever it was. And then he would go back to Pharaoh and say, you said that you would let the people go. And then Pharaoh would change his mind. I think if I had to envision those moments, every single time that happened, Moses would get angry and be like, "Okay, never mind." And God would have to go back to Moses and say, "Nope, Moses, go back to him again," and deal with probably Moses's heart in that moment. That's kind of how, if I were to create a movie, that would be kind of how I would structure it, because of Moses's perceived anger issues. But who knows? Those are just my thoughts, and maybe someday I'll get to talk. Of course I'll get to talk to Moses and learn a little bit about his personality. But today's challenge is really looking at the people in our lives, and if we have somebody who responds with anger, realize that God uses real people. He used Moses, who had an anger issue. He used Moses to lead a nation and bring them to the promised land. He used Moses to perform miracles and win wars, and his whole legacy was there. So if you have somebody in your life that responds in anger, realize that God still loves them and God still uses them. Especially if they're willing to. God will still, he's not going to excommunicate a person because of that. He wants to work on them and help them be better. But also, too, he wants us to learn to be a resolver as well, because goodness gracious, I have faults as well, and I hope that the people surrounding me who love me will, respond and help when I have those issues as well, or whatever it may be. So the point is, look into your life and see if there's anyone in your life that responds in anger, and commit to learning 2 traits today that will help you respond to them when they are in a heightened emotional state. And when that opportunity comes your way, and obviously, I totally believe this. If you're listening to this or watching this, when we are in a state of learning, there's that saying that says, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And it's so true. When we are looking for and learning from the word, and we're, such as today, we're focused on being a resolver in situations where anger may occur. I can almost venture to say that there might be a situation or an opportunity that will come your way today or in the near future, so that you can practice the skills that you are going to learn today. And so just commit to being a resolver and be open-minded to what the Lord shows to you, and commit to learning to be a resolver like Aaron did in those moments of conflict. And so when you are pulling out your journal and having your evening reflection, I want you to write down, this year, and write down what 2 skills you learned today in the article that you read, or the video that you watched, or ChatGPT, or whatever. Write down those skills that you learned so that you can refresh your memory in the future, and commit those sentences or those reactions to memory so that you can definitely pull on them, and it can help diffuse the situation. And if you use those skills today in an opportunity, be sure and write down what happened. How did it end? Did the person respond well? Did they not? Don't expect it to be perfect the first time, but we are learning to be resolvers in heightened emotional situations. We do not have to respond back to a person who responds in anger, just like Aaron did. Aaron did not respond back in anger. He was a resolver and diffused the situation. And at the end of our featured verses, it says, when Moses heard that, obviously, when Moses heard what Aaron said, it seemed good in his sight, and he was calmer. So, hopefully that encouraged you guys and gave you a little bit of insight into that. And I trust that we will all continue to grow and glean from the Word of God and learn how to be a resolver in our heightened emotional situations with others. Have a wonderful day, and you know the drill. In the comments below is the link to get the devotional. And until tomorrow, keep rinsing, reflecting, and repeating. God bless you.